how we use data goes beyond just what we collect. It's actually about how do we communicate that data? How do we tell stories with that data?
Right.
How do we present data in a way that when it enters a kind of a media sphere, it's not going to lose its message, it's not going to become weaponized.
Right.
So that kind of use of data and that communication of data, I think is really, really important to help in kind of navigating this moment, but we don't talk enough about it. We talk a lot about how to design perfect survey questions, how to do better analysis, not so much about the life of that data once we let it go and kind of how it changes and kind of engages society. So yeah, those data conversations were also part of the frustration, I think, in writing the book.